Welcome to Mirage, Speculating on Speculative Fiction. This is Bryan and Aiello. Today I have Kevin Holton with me. He and I are going to discuss Kaiju in fiction. And you are actually a Kaiju fiction author, correct? That's where your novel is set in that kind of genre?
I do some kaiju, some spec fic, sci-fi, little everything. I'd like to think.
And that's real cool. I was looking at your book cover. It's really neat. I like it a lot. So, this is your publisher considers this Kaiju fiction.
That's
What
correct.
is that exactly?
Kaiju is Japanese, I believe, for a strange beast. I call it big smashing monster fiction. That in a nutshell, it's any sort of immense monster designed to destroy.
Yeah.
This year especially is pretty big for kaiju movies. You got Pacific Rim Uprising. What's the other? Rampage is they got that one coming out.
Yeah.
Or is it already out?
I don't know.
Um,
I know what was that Pacific Rim was the only one I'm aware of, right?
yes, yeah.
Would you count Transformers? Is that like a kaiju film too, in a way? Those movies?
I mean, I guess that would depend on who you're asking, because in a sense, it's sort of more giant robots, but then you might have some people arguing that since they're sentient and they can transform, they have like sort of an organic component. You could also argue that they're kaiju's of sorts. That kaiju typically refers to organic,
Okay.
but you did have Mecha Godzilla, so who knows?
So it doesn't stretch to like Transformers, but Godzilla definitely is kaiju.
Right. Godzilla's sort of the, definitive kaiju. It's the one that started it all.
And even
Um,
King Kong is kind of swept into there in a way, right?
yeah.
Am I wrong about that? Or
No, that's right. It's
it's like,
mostly because there's not a lot of King Kongs. If there was a whole race of King Kongs, like hundreds of King Kongs, then it'd probably
mhm.
just be like giant ape.
Oh, that's
But since
interesting.
there's just the one, then that kind of counts. Like with that Rampage movie coming out, you have like the one giant wolf, the one giant gorilla, the one giant what's the other one? I think it's like a lizard or something. Um,
I'm vaguely aware of this movie.
yeah,
I'm
the
vaguely aware of this. I don't. I gotta look this up. I think I've seen it. Like, is it The Rock in it?
yeah, The Rock is the lead guy. It's based off the I don't know if you're much of a gamer. It's based off those old Rampage like any SNES games where you like play
Oh,
the
okay.
giant monster, you go side scrolling, blowing up buildings and stuff.
The Rock is crazy, man. He does like video game movie. He knows those fail like 100% of the time.
Yeah,
This one does look good though. I remember seeing a preview for it with the
yeah.
gorilla. It's interesting the way computer animation is going. I mean,
At
I don't
least
know the.
yeah, at least the computer animation kind of gets things to a certain point. I think Ready Player One counts as a successful video game movie.
Does it?
I mean, well, now that I say that, I got to debate because I mean, it's
Because
not a video game; it's all video games, sort of like Wreck It Ralph, I guess.
yeah, but it's not like It's interesting though because it's a meta, isn't it? You have
Yeah,
Ready
very much.
Player One, which is a novel, but they are playing a game within the novel, and they're playing games within the games within the novel. So I mean, it can get a little bit deeper. Did you enjoy the movie?
I haven't seen it myself,
I haven't
but
seen it.
I'm
The
vaguely
book was
aware of
great.
all the spoilers.
What say what now?
I was joking. I said I'm vaguely aware of all the spoilers.
Did you read the book?
No.
No. And they have giant monsters in that one too. I mean, they're obviously covering a lot of canon within that
Yeah.
movie. I don't know if you'd consider it kaiju for that benefit for that reason alone.
Well, you could definitely say it has kaiju elements, if nothing else.
Who is your favorite kaiju author? To bring that back around
Favorite kaiju author? Are you referring specifically recently or of all time?
of all time.
Because now we got to get into another classification question, as it were. That I mean, if you would consider cosmic horror to involve kaiju,
Yeah, I was gonna say Lovecraft. When I was looking at your
precisely.
when I was looking at your work, that's the first thing that popped in my mind is
Thank you.
Lovecraft. I was like, boom, okay. So kaiju and cosmic horror go hand in hand.
You could definitely make an argument for it because, at the root of it all, cosmic horror is gigantic otherworldly monsters.
Hmm.
Even if you consider them like a race of aliens, still there's like only one of each kind. There's not like 50 Cthulhu's just hanging out getting a beer or something.
Well, the cool thing that Lovecraft did was he made Cthulhu a god,
Yeah,
put him in a pantheon. So that makes
yeah,
them
yeah,
unique.
yeah. That's when you have to raise the question as to whether or not they can even die, you have to start wondering when you breach that gap from kaiju into just
Godhead.
totally screwed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Does Godzilla ever die?
Yeah,
We know
that's
King
a
Kong
good
does.
question. I think Godzilla dies in the same way the Joker dies, in that, like, sure, it's dead, but is it really dead?
Next, until we need him again, until the sequel, and then we'll find a way to resurrect him. God, and I mean, putting that into place, I guess kaiju means what exactly? Monsters. So they're monster movies.
Sorry, one more time.
Kaiju means monster, right? I mean, it's basically a monster movie.
Pretty much. The
Michael Myers and Jason, they kind of fit that mold.
yeah, monster movies, everything does tie in a bit. The as far as would Mike Myers, I mean, I'm sure there would be a market for like Mike Myers fighting Godzilla. I don't know how he would pull it off, but now
From
that
the
we've said
inside.
it, yeah,
He would
if nothing
reincarnate
else.
from the inside into the stomach and fight through the gut lining. Or
And there are
something.
occasionally stories of there are occasionally kaiju stories of humans like growing to gigantic size through whatever reason. So giant Mike Myers fighting the Godzilla, it could happen.
Yeah, not
It
too
would
bad.
definitely. I mean, Freddy fighting Godzilla in Godzilla's dreams, that could be interesting.
Isn't there a Freddy movie coming out?
Yeah. The Nightmare Returns or something. Nightmare, I think it's Nightmare Return to Elm Street. Yeah. I just pulled it up right now. It looks like it already came out. I
When
mean,
was
I'm
it?
obviously a bit behind the.
2018 Return to Elm Street. 2018? Really? That must be horrible if it's coming out in the winter time.
Yeah, why did I say it's already? But is it already? I was seeing a January 1st release, but who knows? Maybe. Um,
This snuck by
January.
completely. Freddy as a
Yeah.
kaiju. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna look up what kaiju actually stands for. It's Japanese strange beast, right? That's so cool. When did they bring this up? I mean, it's so
Yeah.
fascinating if you think about the fact that they didn't have this prior to World War II, but after World War II, this has been kind of their bread and butter, right? I mean, they do these kaiju
Yeah.
films all the time. This and like not even kung fu movies, those are Chinese imports or
Yeah.
exports.
Well, that's one of the great things about kaiju fiction. It's so easy to just overlook it as okay, it's a kind of B movie action. It's a giant thing smashing stuff up. It's a monster brawl. But if you actually like, every kaiju has its own tracked societal representation of fear or some kind of mayhem going on. Godzilla was born directly out of those fears of nuclear fallout and radiation testing and what is this new technology going to do to the flora and fauna around us.
To the world, yeah, that we live in.
Yeah,
I mean, the
but
Japanese are
then
so into balance anyway, aren't they? Nature and man connecting and that in between. And I guess Godzilla is that in between, that response to the nuclear annihilation potential or the fact that we already annihilated them in a nuclear
yeah,
war. And the response to that is Godzilla and all their little monster things. I mean, does that come from something or did that film studio just create this out of nothing? Mothra.
I don't. I mean, I'm sure. I've read some Japanese folklore. I have a book actually of Japanese. No, I wouldn't. They're called bedtime story, like children's tales. I would not call some of these some stories that you should read to your children. but these sort of exaggerated monstrous spheres do have sort of a permanence in society.
So they go
So
back
I would
beyond World War II. They were doing this stuff before then.
right. I mean,
This
there
comes from
wasn't nothing I've
mythology.
seen suggests the sort of Godzilla arc exact like a Godzilla thing, but the Japanese interpretation of dragons, coming from water and all that, and being like
Huh.
lording over elements rather than like material wealth as in the
Oh, that's very
Western
interesting.
dragons.
Yeah, because
They had,
dragons do have that kind of tone to them, don't they? Fire
yeah.
breathers, and they come from another world or whatnot.
Hmm.
Um, Cultural impact of Godzilla is amazing. I mean, how many movies? I'm looking at like 75 different titles going
Oh
back.
yeah,
Yeah, man, it's
and that's not
ridiculous
even
looking at how
counting
many.
like spin-offs and things inspired by.
That's crazy. Um, so yeah, you add King Kong to that. We know King Kong dies at the end, and they only can reincarnate him into that same exact story time and time again, right?
Yeah,
I mean, there's whispers of King Kong versus Godzilla coming up. That would be
they are that.
fascinating.
I mean, there's so many whispers at this point. You figure it's got to be set in stone.
What is it? You don't, is it not
Oh no,
100%?
I honestly have no idea. I'm just saying that at a certain point, you hear enough people talking about something, the studio is going to decide to do it.
Yeah. So I thought that was going to be the sequel to the last King Kong movie.
You'd have thought, right?
Maybe. What is so Lovecraft got you into this genre?
More or less. I'd say that was yeah, that was probably where I got my start was through well, a little bit of a mix of the writings of H.P. Lovecraft and the like Resident Evil, Silent Hill video game series. That
You
those
like
two,
the horror elements?
yeah, those two, and if you've ever heard of his kind of a cult game, Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem.
No, I've not heard of that.
Long title. It's kind of hard to say, but Eternal Darkness, as people usually abbreviate it, was pretty much directly inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. You find this book, and you go through all the lives of the people who had that book before you as they fight against the tyrannical reign of these monstrous kaiju-like elder gods. And so, I mean, playing through that game, reading H.P. Lovecraft, like the impact of Cthulhu, like the psychological element to brought into these giant monsters, and sort of like, and then in terms of like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, the societal impact, like those two games in particular were very clearly brought out by real world fears, either of scientific meddling or of religion and occultism, and just and abnormal psychology. Um, Being able to see like the subtlety and nuance behind it is what I think really got me into it. I've always been into
Uh-huh.
like psychology enough and all that. So seeing these genres that could take a giant monster but have it mean something, like have it's not just okay, it's big and smashes things, but it actually has significance. It has a cultural purpose, it has a societal, a psychological, a personal meaning for whoever comes across it. That kind of thing really got me thinking a lot about monsters, big and small, and how they can how no matter how big they are, they always have that small scale, that personal significance.
Yeah, somebody's versing them, right? They're the antagonist to someone, be it a general head of a army or a small person trying to save his family or something along those lines. I mean, I
Yeah.
guess they do have that kind of conflict. Your novel, what are the beings that your protagonist is working against?
So the my novel At the Hands of Madness starts off with the narrator's first person point of view, is guy Hennessy Jones talking to some new
Hennessy
recruits.
Jones, what a great
Yeah.
name.
Thank you. The He's talking to some new recruits about new to his militia about the threats they're going to face, and he outlines everything right up front. Basically, at first he just talks about there are these human-sized locust creatures, the Frana, and razor sharp limbs, ravenous appetite. Then they hatch, basically they swarm out of the kaiju's flesh. They crawl their way out, and just attack whatever happens to be nearby until they either bloat or give up or die or rot in the Earth atmosphere or get killed. And that's actually what the militia is there for. He says, we're not here to fight the kaiju. We're here to defend our city, the city of Great Bend behind them. We're here to defend them from the Frana so that the people of this city don't get overrun. Because the actual kaiju, this thing, Madraka, is basically impervious. Nobody's been able to hurt it. They can't figure out what it wants or what it's doing on Earth. It appeared as if from nowhere one day, and sometimes it will destroy a whole city with the wave of a hand. Just like can psychically crush it, just render a million people to dust in an instant, or it'll just walk on by. It won't do anything. So that was one thing I wanted to play with is the every kaiju story, it seems, as soon as it shows up, it sees living people, it's got to attack them. It sees a city, it's got to attack it. Every single like kaiju story pretty much I've read, with a few exceptions, and as soon as it shows up, attacks. And me, I wanted a kaiju that was just like, it doesn't really care. Don't piss it off. It hasn't done anything. Don't provoke it. And maybe it'll just leave.
Are you working on it as a series, the novel, or is it a standalone?
I mean, it can be read either way. I did write it so it could function as a standalone.
I appreciate that.
But it also does have room for more. There's I obviously don't want to give away how it ends, but the tone of the ending is you can either read it as needing to keep fighting or ready to give up. So whichever one you choose basically is whether it stands alone or becomes the sequel.
Yeah. It's interesting. Your monsters are fantastic sounding. And I'm looking at what it takes to build these things up. I guess there's a pedigree in folktales. Where did you get your ideas for the monsters? Did you just come up with them? Or is it an amalgamation of other things that you've been collecting over the years?
I mean, I
Reading this
kind of want to
genre
say
and
both.
enjoying both.
Yeah, it's hard to I think because writing is such a subconscious thing, it's hard not to in some way have that amalgam of previous influences. I do think if there's any one particular influence for the Frana, well, actually probably two things. As far as like hatching out of the kaiju itself, I sort of think do you remember the first The Mummy movie?
Brandon Fraser,
Yeah, that one.
or the complete reboot with no, it's not a reboot with Tom Cruise, is it?
No, not the Tom Cruise
Sequel.
one. Never
Yeah.
the Tom Cruise one.
Never.
Yeah.
I couldn't watch it all the way through. Yeah, of course.
The you remember the scarabs when they go inside the one dude's skin?
Vaguely.
I think basically that scene stuck out to me so much as a kid, and I was like,
It's
"Oh, bugs
horrible.
in the skin! What? Oh my god, it's terrible." I think basically like I reversed that. Um, so there was that, and there was an episode of Courage the Cowardly Dog where there's this one like locust creature that kind of like just he's kind of a schmoozy guy, he kind of like badgers Courage a bit, and but then he has this like little mouse door in his apartment that's got like this huge padlock on it. And he's like, "You want to see what's behind that door?" And Courage kind of like nods. And he's like, "You don't want to see what's behind that door." And Courage shakes his head again. At the end of the episode, they leave Eustace there. At the end of the episode, they come back. The camera pans back, and that little door is just slamming shut. And Eustace is completely without flesh. It's just a skeleton sitting in the chair. And
Well, yeah.
I was like, "What was behind that door? What was this? What was this locust thing hiding?" But the locust thing himself, with its, his like kind of like schmoozy personality and being like creepy, like he knows something he shouldn't. That that stuck out to me too. So not that the Frana talk or anything, or actually act anything like that particular character, but I think like the locust, the flesh eating, as it were.
I mean, it's crazy how much insanity you can push into these topics, right? I
Yeah.
mean, not topics, but these storylines with these strange fiction. I mean, you wanted to talk about strange fiction or weird tales. Which one was it?
Whichever. I
Yeah.
know.
I mean, you can go anywhere you want, wherever your imagination takes you,
You
and
really
there is
can.
no rhyme or reason for it. But I mean, as far as kaiju, which is the subject at hand, I mean, it seems like it's so you know, filled. Our culture's filled with it. Our art culture, science fiction, fantasy, and it's never called kaiju in America. Obviously, that's a Japanese word,
Yeah.
but I guess we call it what, monster films and stuff like that. I mean, the definition can go all the way back to Dracula
I
in a
mean,
way.
yeah, you could almost. I think kaiju is more. I think like this is more reserved for the giant monsters. But I mean, yeah, in a sense, kaiju, werewolves, anything that qualifies as a strange beast could be looked at as an extension of this genre.
Yeah. And where does it come from? What's the original being, do you think? Just a ghost? Some
Well,
kind
like the
of evil
original,
spirit? I
like the
mean, because
first supernatural entity, as it were.
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at right now, I'm looking at the Wikipedia page for Japanese folklore, and I was hoping that because I went to it from the Kaiju page, that it'd be right to the specific information that I wanted. I, of course, wasn't able to find it. But it's interesting to think that Godzilla is kind of based loosely on a mythological creature from the Japanese past. You know what I mean? And
Yeah,
then where does that creature actually come from? That's what's fascinating, isn't it? That I mean, these are stories that are resonating with human history in a way.
yeah. The as far as history goes, I mean, really depending on how far you want to take it back and as far as you want to go, the I don't know if you'd call it the first, but definitely one of the first, Zoroastrianism. Are you familiar with it?
The term,
The term, the religion in general, in passing, maybe. Not
maybe,
that you
yeah,
have to
I
like.
think so. How do you spell it? Because I just want to take a look at it before I say
All
yes
right,
or
no
no.
worries. I'm looking at it right now. I'll tell you. Zoroastrianism. The but the thing that sticks out to me about this religion, what maybe bring it up, is in terms of strange beasts and abstract supreme fears and evils, is in Zoroastrianism the principle, it was defined by this cosmic struggle between the ultimate good and the ultimate evil, and the ultimate evil was this embodiment of malice and destruction, basically Angramayinyu. I have no idea if I'm saying that right, but this beast was supposed to be so evil that its existence alone was proof of hell.
And what time frame are we talking about here? I'm looking at the Wikipedia page now, and it looks like this is a religion that spawned from Persia,
Yeah, I'm looking at
potentially
circa 600 BC.
600 BCE is what I'm, or no, wait,
I mean, it's the same thing.
CE 650. Okay. Confusing myself. Yeah, so 600 BCE is when this started, and it lasted for about 1250 years.
Yeah. There are still, as with all major religions, some people probably practicing it today, but I always I think back to that, that concept that this is with this creature so evil that it's proof of eternal damnation, that there is an afterlife and it's going to suck if you don't do something right now.
But what do you have to do
To
to
what?
avoid that afterlife?
Oh, well, I don't practice Zoroastrianism. I don't know much about the religion myself. So, all I do know is that there's another supposed like element to the religion that once influenced by the spirit of Angramayi, you can never truly be free of it. That you'll
Yeah.
always be tempted towards anger and destruction. So I think sort of almost like the Christianity aspect, the Catholicism, like just resisting temptation is the way to go.
Resisting temptation. It looks like there are three tenets to the religion: Humata, Hakta, and Hervata. Those are not how you say those words, but they mean good thoughts, good words, and good deeds.
That
And
sounds like
there's only one
Buddhism.
path. It doesn't it? And this does show up in India too,
Yeah.
as an
Okay.
as an apparent.
And I mean, if you think of Angramayi as Lucifer, pretty easy transition there.
Right. I mean that kind of figure shows up in literature since the beginning of writing.
Yeah.
That's always been there, and that's always a very interesting concept. The idea of a corrupter, right? A destroyer of of good, a wanter of evil.
Yeah, I actually
That's not a
one
Godzilla, though. I mean, we're not talking about a sentient life form that is like, I need to do this because of some excuse I've concocted or for some higher purpose.
yes.
Do your monsters have a higher purpose, or are they just monsters functioning as beasts?
Well, I would say with these particular monsters, not verging off in any of the other like stories or novels that have coming out or whatever,
Hmm.
um, the Frana are essentially newborns. Like it's easy to forget because they're so big,
Ah,
but you literally like if they show up, you've almost certainly just watched them being born out of this creature's flesh.
so they're
So
blank slates. They're creating their own destiny, whether it's right or wrong. They're creating their path.
well, there's that, and they're also just hungry. They were just bored. They kind of want something to eat. As far as Madraka goes, there's if you look at the cover art, you'll see it has four arms and this monstrous head. In the story itself, it actually has no head and is split most of the way down the middle, as if
Mhm.
by some massive blow. There's a reason I have the cover art like that as opposed to showing it without the head. If you read, you will see the details there that explain when, why you see it with the head. But the Madraka without a head it's still a psychic entity. It draws its power from the void more than actual biological structure. But without sight and hearing, it relies mostly on its intuition and the sensations and impacts it gets from the world around it. So, for the most part, it might not attack you just because it doesn't know you're there. But if you provoke it, like I mentioned, then yeah, it's an animal, and not only that, but it's also in some senses a wounded animal, just trying
Mhm.
to defend itself. But of course, you can also piss it off, so maybe it just wants to kill you.
That's fascinating. Get out of its way, or be
Yeah.
unlucky enough to be in its path. Basically, is how it boils down. There's nothing you can do about it,
Mm,
really, but just count your lucky stars whether or not you've interacted with it. It's
yes.
very interesting. Cloverfield Lane, I think it's the second one with John Goodman.
Yeah.
When the woman comes out of the bunker and she looks over and sees, the alien invasion or whatever the hell is happening, and she could have stayed in the bunker and avoided all of it, but she left, and now she put herself in the path of pure destruction. But it's not for the point of destruction. It's just because it happens to be producing a destruction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very fascinating because, I mean, man, if you look at Japanese culture, because kaiju, I go kind of hand in hand with Japanese culture, right? And
Mm,
their history with tsunamis and earthquakes and things of that nature. I
yeah.
mean, the tsunami and the earthquake are just tsunamis and earthquakes. They don't really care about humanity. They just get in their way and they create destruction in their wake. It's fascinating. That's how you can kind of boil it down to these monsters being like not geographical, but geological events, weather
Yeah.
things that happen that flatten human beings, not because they're evil, just because they are.
Yeah. I mean, look at what was it at this point? God, I don't even remember because there's been so many ecological things and wars and events and things to pay attention to. But there was that earthquake that caused a tsunami a few years back, and it like hit those nuclear reactors, and the whole area
Yeah,
was
you're
melting
talking about
down.
Fukushima,
Yeah, that was it.
Fukushima,
Thank you.
something like that. So I'm saying it wrong. Fukushima? That sounds completely wrong.
We've covered a lot of cultures so far. I think we can forgive some of the
Well,
pronunciation.
we're staying in Japan, huh? I mean, in terms of kaiju, I mean, they go hand in hand with Japan. We kind of mentioned that already, but America does it too. With King Kong was like the originator, I guess. Here, Bigfoot maybe would work because I guess I don't know. The idea that kaijus can be anything is intriguing to me.
Yeah,
But I guess Bigfoot's more mythological, isn't it?
more that would probably fall under cryptid.
Cryptid, yeah, cryptoid zoology.
Yeah,
Um,
cryptozoology. There it is.
I mean, can you think of other American versions of kaiju? Paul Bunyan,
I mean, he's big enough, right? I
right?
forget how big he was, but that's. I mean, maybe if you wanted to stretch it, and this isn't American so much, but Loch Ness.
The Scottish Loch Ness
Yeah.
monster.
You could maybe argue, depending on how big its rumored size was, that the Loch Ness is some form of sort of like a benevolent Godzilla.
Hmm.
Maybe. There's probably, I would say more unfortunately than factually that if there are any American kaijus to fear, they're probably rooted more in Native American culture, and we either don't know because our mainstream doesn't really pay attention to that, or those stories have been lost.
Native American, yeah, definitely, right? I mean, because like,
Yeah.
I mean, it comes from basically making excuses for things that you don't know an answer for. And
Yeah.
I hate to even say it, but like the Western European peoples were already coming up with scientific reasons things were happening and giving it less credit to monsters or whatever.
Well, we had that, and we also, the Western European had the huge Judeo-Christian influence, whereas like the native like looked at like the spirits and the environment, and like you mentioned, like geographic and geological issues. Um,
Great points.
yeah,
Great
the
points. Yeah.
European cultures were so heavily influenced by this
Book. Yeah.
monotheism, this one god, and the idea that all things stem from Lucifer. I mean, look at like Dracula was viewed as the son of the devil, or like a patron of the devil, and or if the devil was a patron of Dracula. Zombies rising from the dead were viewed as defilement of the grave, the sacrament of last burial rites. Ghosts were viewed as spirits unable to rest because they weren't given burial rites. Um, there's so much of not only like the personal psychological horror of like the European demons, but it was so much it was so rooted in moral horror that these were the times that you needed bourbon to deal with like the affront of getting mud splashed on your waistcoat.
It's there though, isn't it? The hierarchy of demons and saints and angels and
Yes, absolutely.
monsters. I mean, it's there in the Christianity as well. I mean, you have like oh God, what do they call them? The things on the side of the buildings, the
Gargoyles.
gargoyles. Yeah, those kind of creatures that keep evil spirits away at the same time, allowing water to run off churches and not ruin the masonry.
Yeah,
Um, but anyway, I mean, the both sides are kind of a big bad guy and a big good guy with God and the devil. And
yeah.
it kind of boils down to that in Lovecraft's too. He has a top demon or top god,
Mm,
top of his pantheon. Can't remember who it is off the top of my head, but there is
no.
one. And Godzilla is not the top in Japan. I mean, there's got to be somebody above him.
Yeah, I mean, whatever the sort of animal world hierarchy is of gigantic creatures, because I know he's fought Mothra. I don't know if Godzilla won, or I know there's probably I think there's female Godzilla. I think they said something about laying eggs at some point. Um, I don't know.
But Godzilla is just a monster trying to survive and just happening upon Japan over and over and over
Right, due to the grave geographic misfortune.
again. It's in the middle of its mating path or something.
Yeah.
Does that, in terms of kaiju, do you think that makes it more or less interesting? If you put it like this monster in the middle of other monsters as in rankings, is it better to have it just be a mindless monster doing its thing, or do you want it to have a purpose?
I'm trying to sort of think of it like a dog almost, that like yeah, it
Exactly.
has a purpose, but it's
Uh,
probably like inscrutable.
it has like a natural instinct to
Yeah.
do the thing that it's doing because something else has trained it,
Yeah,
even
that's
genetically implanted it or something. That's interesting.
yeah. Whatever the case may be, that's like the kaiju author Christopher. I've never heard his last name pronounced. I want to say it's Negro,
Uh-huh.
spelled Nigro. If you want to look him up, his a number of his kaiju works feature elements written from the kaiju's perspective. My story at the Hands of Madness does not, but him, and actually also Tim Wagner's Teeth of the Sea does this too. I would specify him overall, but I don't know if he's written other monster works. Both of them have written in their stories, respectively, bits from the monster kaiju's perspective, and kind of elaborated in either on the personal drive and desire behind their kaiju, like why is it attacking this particular place, this thing right now, or in Wagner's case, even the hierarchy, the well, was a matriarchy, the mating path, the rituals, etc., the inter-clan warring that also fueled part of his creature's flight.
So how did they were going with Negro? Since
I'm not sure. Let's just say Christopher.
Christopher's idea is, I had it read getting inside the Kaiju's head.
Interesting. It was good. It was good to see, because if it's just, like I mentioned, if it's just you're watching the creature smash stuff up, it's easy to kind of write the creature off as just being destructive. Um, but in his case, you got to see not only that it was territorial, it was awakened from slumber and viewed this as its home. Like, what are these other things doing here, trying to establish dominance with these skyscrapers? But also, in certain cases, it would stop its like onslaught and go after certain people because it had this massive pride involved that it couldn't let these particular humans get away, because it would view that as the greatest affront to its power.
And this is the mindless monster.
Ostensibly mindless. Once you have sections like that, you get to see that it, even in a rudimentary term, it does have some kind of functional intelligence. Even if it's
Interesting.
just enough to say, like, "How dare you challenge me?"
I mean, they do say that animals of all types have kind of a self-awareness. They are aware of their needs and they exist, I guess.
Yeah,
And it would be more or less like that. I mean, if I yell at my dog, she's going to cower in response.
yeah,
If I hit the kaiju with a nuclear bomb, it's going to be mad at me for a little bit
yeah. Probably.
and
I'd
come
get
after me.
If I survive getting hit with a nuke, I'd probably be upset.
I mean, not many stories do delve into the animalistic mindset of a monster.
Hmm.
It's unique. I
Yeah,
can't think of any that I've read that kind of. Well, I don't read many monster stories though. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of monster movies, and in movies it's more action oriented, and you don't get an opportunity to see inside the being's
yeah,
thoughts.
you really don't.
It's causing destruction. I mean, what is Michael Myers' main objective? To have murder his family, to rid the earth of all his genetics? I can't. I mean, if really he doesn't tell you, you can only assume because he's killing his family members every single movie.
No, yeah, he absolutely does not tell you. It's kind of a mystery. At least, like with some serial killers, you do get that explanation. Like that's the one thing that I liked about the original three Saw movies, is that you had that insight to John Kramer's personality and makeup and why he's doing the things he does. But yeah, Mike Myers, you never really know. Freddy, you kind of get an idea. He kind of explains it, but
Well,
at
he's a
the end, he's just
demon,
having
right?
fun.
And he's just like he's a supernatural being, isn't he? Like the Dream, the
He
Sandman,
is,
or something like that.
he is I'm if I try to remember his backstory, I'm gonna invariably mix it up with the Simpsons horror episode, the Halloween episode where they spoofed the Freddy series. Something like people thought he was a pedophile, so they burned him to death or something, but he wasn't. So he came back to take revenge on the kids and whatever the parents threw the kids. I think I could be way off base. Like I said, I'm getting a whole bunch of different things mixed up. But
It's one part of the '80s that I missed was the Freddy Krueger movies. I don't think I've ever actually seen one all the way through. I am aware that Johnny Depp is in the first one,
yes,
and he
and
gets sucked into a waterbed, I think.
that's the only scene that's one of the only two scenes I've seen from any Freddy movie, is Johnny Depp getting sucked into a waterbed.
Interesting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen Michael Myers. I love Halloween movies. They're awesome. Jason movies are ridiculous, but they're pretty good too. But I've never seen Freddy all the way through.
You know,
Um,
I just thought of an interesting point here, maybe, well, you might find it interesting, that answers a question you asked like 20 minutes ago, maybe, is for us, for American canon, I want to say, a lot of our kaiju stuff is wrapped up in comic books. Like you think about the creatures Batman fights, the things Superman fights, the things that I'm blanking on Marvel, like Thanos. There's an
Yeah.
argument to be made that things like Thanos or what's the Silver Surfers, the dude Galactus, are you could argue that they're kaiju's. I mean, the Avengers, at least with the giant floating space worms of death, those were kind of kaiju. And in a
And
way,
they're always
Ultron
the
was
minion of something else, though, too, right? I mean, that's mainly what a kaiju is a mindless minion monster thingy that if
more or
you dig
less.
further back into the see, that's interesting because now I've actually learned what a kaiju is.
I'm happy to be teaching something.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So that yeah, so what are the things above a kaiju called then?
Well, there is above a kaiju, there's Dai Kaiju, which I think just means like massive strange beast. So if you have like Godzilla, and then you think of like two Godzillas standing on each other's shoulders wearing a trench coat, that would be Dai Kaiju.
But they're not in charge of the kaiju. Know what I
I
mean? They're
guess
just
that
the
would
bigger
depend.
kaiju.
I guess that would depend on the director or writers or whoever. That if they fight, if they're just like two different creatures living in the same area, then yeah, neither has dominion. But if it's in terms of like the animal kingdom hierarchy, then the smaller might yield to the power of the larger.
But what we were talking about with H.P. Lovecraft, it's the pantheon,
Yes.
right? I mean, there's a layered pantheon, and one thing is on the very top of it, and the kaiju are on a level. They're basically like, well, like we said, mindless animals that are trained to destruct, and they're pointed in a direction. But who's pointing them?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
I mean,
that's that what I would argue is correct. There are a few stories out there that feature kaiju being controlled, sometimes by humans, sometimes by outside forces, but that's usually pretty far between.
because one thing Lovecraft never actually did was say this is what Cthulhu wants. This is his motivation. This is what this pantheon of gods is looking to do. They're just kind of humans discovering this and then going crazy.
Yeah, pretty much. I do think, if I recall correctly, and it's been a while actually, unfortunately, since I read and actually sat down and read Lovecraft stuff. Um, but if I remember right, Cthulhu's job was to, once he reawakens, was to go and awaken the other gods. Like he was viewed as sort of the doctor, I think, like some like sort of ancient medicine man,
Yeah.
except hundreds of feet tall and capable of driving you insane by looking at him.
So I mean, what was the point of when they all woke up? What were they going to do?
I don't know.
Right.
That's where you get me. It's like wipe out reality, end time and all existence. It's like, with the kind of goes back to what I was mentioning before, like with like Thanos and the upcoming Infinity War. Like in the comics, Thanos wanted to kill a whole lot of people because he was in love with Lady Death and wanted to impress her. But
Mm.
Lady Death isn't in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so what's his point? What does he want to do? You
He
don't
just
know.
wants to collect those stones, right? I mean,
Want
that's
to collect
basically what his motivation is at this point.
He's
I
gonna
think.
collect the stones and he's gonna kill a whole lot of people. A whole lot of
Yeah,
it.
getting the stones. I think. I'm not the biggest fan, unfortunately, of these movies. I watch them after the
Yeah,
fact.
it's fine. It's fine.
But I did love Iron Man.
Iron Man is fun.
I mean, I
Iron
love
Man
them
is
all. I think they're
fun.
doing a great job. It's so fascinating what they've done with this Avengers. This what do they call it? The stages, stage
Yeah,
four,
they have like the stage one, stage two. This is I think this marks the end of stage two with Infinity
stage
War.
two. Okay,
I think.
it's been fascinating. It's been fascinating to watch this. I mean, how many movies? It's like 40 movies go into this.
It's ridiculous.
It's awesome. It's like historic. It's amazing to have actually been able to witness something like that.
I mean,
I
like I'm
mean,
not what I would call full-time employed, but I literally don't make enough money to keep up and watching all the movies.
right? I mean, if you don't have a site that you can go to watch streaming movies on, then you're definitely paying a lot of money if you want a night of Marvel cinematic fun.
Yeah, I wanted to go see Black Panther, but I did not get a chance to.
I saw it in Amsterdam. It's wonderful. I thought it was a
Ah,
really great movie.
rubbing it in.
Right. um, so you are more of a reader than a moviegoer, or would you consider yourself a movie fan as well as
I would say, well, one thing you need to know about me is I am guaranteed to ruin any movie you watch with me.
Why?
Not because like I will intentionally do it, but especially because like my go-to is horror movies, but I'm always cracking jokes about them.
Uh-huh.
So like especially I have one friend in particular that neither of us drink anymore, thankfully. We almost like died last time. But the we had a drinking game more or less about every time the movie did something stupid enough that I could make a joke about it, we would drink. And
What
we
movie was
realized,
it?
oh, I don't even remember. There's no way for either of us to remember what movie it was. But the yeah, long story short, the we don't play that game anymore. But I still ruin movies. Is The only movie I would say I'm guaranteed not to ruin is A Quiet Place because have you seen it?
No, I've heard it's really good though, and I think it's
Well,
based on a comic book series, but I'm not 100% certain about that.
okay, well, I'm going to circle back to the based on bit, but the interesting thing about that movie, and I've not seen it myself yet either, I'm seeing it in about a week with a different friend, and I'm not going to ruin this one because the thing about this movie is that silence is such a part of the movie's atmosphere that, from what I understand, nobody in the theater makes a sound.
It's interesting.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
like
it's
it
had like an
extends.
outrageous weekend, 50 million bucks.
Oh yeah,
I
and
mean,
the
is it,
but the based on thing, this is an interesting thing, and I guess this is also a very important note for all writers out there to like just keep in mind is this A Quiet Place is an original story in an original script, and from what I understand, there was no hanky panky going on, no harm, no foul intended, but Tim Laban wrote this novel, The Silence, and please forgive me, Tim, if I said your name wrong and you're listening. Um, but The Silence was almost exactly the same story. The Silence came out first, mind you. Like his novel came first, and they were making it into a movie. But then all of a sudden, A Quiet Place showed up and rocked the box offices, and it's amazing. And now there's this kind of confusion and tension. Like there's some people obviously alleging that maybe the screenplay writers ripped off the story. Some people are saying there's no allegation, there's no evidence of that allegation. I have no dog in this race. I'm not weighing in either way, not accusing anybody anything, so don't sue me. uh,
huh? It's heartbreaking.
yeah, it's scary too. There's this psychology principle. I don't know if you would, maybe it's sociology, but they call it the 100 monkeys principle, that once enough of a certain creature in a certain population learns something, the other creatures, even in remote areas, will automatically learn that ability or learn it very quickly. Like it was studied, there was a particular island where monkeys learn to, some species of monkey learn to use like a stick as a tool for like a certain thing. And then independently, like 100 miles away, through no interaction at all, a different group of monkeys was observed doing the same thing.
What's
And
it called again?
it's the 100 monkeys principle or the 100 monkeys theory or something like that. Um, and the reason I bring that up is like, it's entirely possible, and you might even say probable given the state of media these days, Hollywood funding, maybe this was just a smart way to play it. Especially it would be cheaper in terms of effects, probably. Um, it's totally possible for two, three, four creative types to have the same idea and run with it,
Yeah,
so
the
Tim,
implementation of those ideas are going to be totally different, but
you would hope,
the
but
core is going to be the same. I mean, how
yeah,
many vampire stories are there?
yeah, right. But this idea of some mysterious creature attacking you if you make sound, as the timing is really unfortunate. And there are some like specific details that are also really similar, which is why people are like, but did they read the book? And again, I'm not saying one way or another. I'm not making judgments there. Um, but
The thought that pops up. Oh,
yes.
feedback is what I'm hearing. The thought that pops up for me is the Doctor Who monster, the angels that
Mm.
move when you don't look at them, or something along those lines. I think it's when you blink.
The Weeping Angels, yeah.
Yeah, the scariest thing. Those are the best monsters ever. But this is kind of like that. If you make a sound, it comes after you, I guess.
Yeah.
judge based on what you just said, because I really have no idea. All I know is that John Krasinski is in it, and that was surprising. And then two, it's done really well, which was also surprising.
Yeah, horror doesn't seem to get enough care in Hollywood these days.
Yeah.
There are some movies out there, like though there's just like not a lot of research or time. Like people try to churn out these big budget hits. Like even The Conjuring fell victim. That franchise and including the Annabelles and all that fell victim to a lot of tropey cliches that don't actually apply in real life. Like
Is The Conjuring the one where the witch starts it out with the baby?
well, I think that could describe so many movies.
So it was so horrible. It was a naked hag, like what you would picture a hag to be, and I think it was cooking an infant or something along those lines.
All right, that was not The Conjuring, but if you remember the name of that movie, please tell me. Because
Witchcraft, the witching, the witch,
oh, you
something
mean
really
maybe The
lame.
Witch? Maybe I didn't see The Witch, but maybe that's what you're thinking
It's
of.
supposed to be brilliant though, and that scene was very disturbing.
All right, if supposed to be brilliant does sound like the way they describe The Witch, but like,
That's what
did
that
you
is.
know that you know how like the supernatural movies always feature an upside down cross at some point, like ooh Satan.
Yeah. You mean like The
You know,
Exorcist or whatnot?
yeah, the
Yeah.
upside down cross is actually a symbol of I believe it's Saint Peter.
Yeah. I mean, he had the Romans crucify him upside down so he didn't die like Christ.
Yeah, thank you. Like you're like the only person I talk to who knows that.
I loved a movie called Cuba Dis when I was a kid. It was an old 1960s, 1950s Roman epic sand and sandals thing. It was so good. I watched it over and over again. And Peter's a character in it. They show his crucifixion. It's the only reason I know that.
I mean, well, either way, you get the point across. Is that so many movies these days are like, oh, the cross is upside down now, Satan is near, and I'm like, but it's not. It's actually a symbol of the utmost piety. It's
Well,
like,
the whole idea of religion, though, is ridiculous. If you start breaking it apart and looking at what they're actually intending and meaning and whatnot, you're like, oh, come on.
mm,
You should have put some more thought into this. This story sucks.
yeah, there are quite a lot of I would say almost every religion that you look at it, it's like, yeah, this is hypocritical. This doesn't make sense. What are we doing?
Right? And the
It's
idea of faith is that you overlook that stuff and make excuses for it, which is how people who love Star Wars watch the movies
yeah,
nowadays.
yeah, the yeah, there's so much. I mean, like, I do believe there's other stuff out there. I mean, I would say I'm spiritual and not religious, as it were, like sort of just like a floaty agnostic type. But yeah, I'm not. I was raised Catholic more or less by my dad tried to raise me Catholic. That's the best way of saying it. My dad tried to raise me Catholic.
Yeah, I got raised Catholic too.
Didn't take.
Yeah, man, it's just too much out there, especially if
Yeah,
you have an inquisitive
very
mind.
much.
I mean, it's impossible to not fill it with things that are going to counter the Catholic teachings.
Yeah, right. I mean, like, there's so much, and especially, religious types aren't doing their religions any favor when you see things like that flat earther dude who wanted to build a rocket to launch himself into the air to see
He
if
did launch himself up into the air, and the
did
dumbass got like 5,000 feet and said, "Nope, still flat." It's like,
because like
okay,
yeah, the Earth is really big. You're not
yeah,
going to be able to see the curvature per se unless you're
yeah,
like at the top of Everest.
yeah.
And then you have people who look at the pictures from the top of Everest and they're like, nah, it's Photoshop.
I will say this: I'm
Yes.
getting a lot of feedback, unfortunately, hearing my voice pop back, which is not good.
Is that
But
hold on, let me see if I can I didn't realize that was has that been going on the whole time? Is that recent?
I just started.
All right, let me see here. How's that? Is that
I think I might have fixed. Oh yeah, perfect. Um, no, nope, it's still there. Yeah, we're about to finish up anyway. But the thing I was going to mention, which is now completely gone from my brain, we were talking about that dude. I love the idea of the flat Earth people, the flat Earth society. I love them, not because I think they're right, just because I think it's an amazing way to look at the world differently, and create a whole mythology around it. And what we were talking about this entire podcast, Kaiju, is kind of the same thing in a way. I mean, you want an idea and you create a whole mythology around it. And with your monsters, you have a thing you want them to do and you create a reason why it's happening. It's brilliant. I love it.
thank you. I love writing in a mythology. Like, you know how Stephen King has Castle Rock? How like
Yeah.
everything takes place at Castle Rock. I have a few cities that pop up routinely in my stories, and a few, I guess I'll just call them entities. They're not kaiju, they're more like astral kind of,
Hmm.
that I call them the saints. They're not Catholic saints, mind you. They're you know, the saints of their own things. Like one is the saint of last resorts, that kind of stuff. But
I like writing about the astral plane, though. I think that's an interesting idea.
yeah, I love the idea of having sort of like, you know, I used to, I don't really play much anymore, but I used to be big on video games, and I loved Easter eggs. You know, you're playing a game and you find, you know, like you're playing Ratchet and Clank and you find a little Jack and Daxter figurine. You're like, oh hey, you know, that's a little nod to people who've played both games.
Hmm.
And I love the idea of doing that for stories, that, you know, you don't necessarily have to go read the person's entire bibliography, but maybe if you've read two novels, they make a joke about something you read in the other one, and you're like, oh,
Nowadays,
that's
it
great.
seems like everybody's writing series. I mean, there's no chance for Easter eggs anymore because everything matters to the storyline.
Yeah. The I I have what was it? I've kind of mentioned before. I have this novel out. I have three novels on the way. None of them are actually in a series, but they all have a little bit of that Easter egg component that I mentioned. So
Oh, cool. So you have one book that's published right now. Um, who is your publisher? Is that, who did I see? Free Press?
the At the Hands of Madness is through Severed Press.
Oh, okay. Are you going to publish all through them, or are you looking for another?
Oh, with the I would probably, if I was going to do the next, like if the next two of At the Hands of Madness, because like I mentioned, it would be a series if all goes well. You know, if it sells well and keeps up the income and the revenue and all that, and is kind of earns the next books. That would ideally be a trilogy, and that I would keep with them. But the other three, so I have the Nightmare King coming out with Siren's Call Publications.
Great title. I like that a lot.
Thank you. I have Nova EXE coming out with Mighty Quill Books. And through HellBound Books, I have These Walls Don't Talk, They Scream.
It's a great title, too.
Thank you. It's title's important.
Yeah, title's important. Covers are important. What's inside's definitely important.
Oh, yeah.
And hey, this has been a great conversation about Kaiju. Gonna have to come back on so we can continue discussing various elements of speculative fiction.
Yeah, happy to be here.